Hi, and welcome to More Human, More Resources, the HR podcast for entrepreneurs. I'm Vicki Brown, your host and CEO of Edomineo Enterprises. As a serial entrepreneur, I understand that having the right expert help has been critical to my success. That's why I'm dedicated to telling you, in plain language, what's going on in the world of HR that might impact your business, and what you need to do about it, with real actionable tips to help you master that list of must-dos and grow your leadership muscle. First things first, the information contained in this podcast is provided for general purposes only and is not to be considered legal advice. Your decision to adopt or not adopt any practice or procedure mentioned in this podcast is solely yours, and we bear no responsibility for the outcome. We urge you to always consult legal counsel and other appropriate licensed professionals. And with that, let's get into the show. You're listening to Season 1, Episode 7. In this week's episode, our question of the day is overtime. Who gets it, when, and why? But before we do a deep dive on that question, let's take a quick look at what's happening around the nation. Under the Good News heading, if your business was impacted by a state or local governmental order due to COVID-19, well, you may be eligible for 50% employee retention tax credit. You'll have to meet certain conditions, such as having your business full or partially suspended, or if your gross receipts for the calendar quarter are less than 50% of the gross receipts for the same quarter in the prior year, among other eligibility items. But considering the year we've all just had, it's a great idea to have a conversation with your accountant to see if this or any other tax credit might apply to you for 2020. I'll put a link to more information in the show notes. As a reminder, the paid leave requirements under the Families First COVID-19 Response Act end on December 31st, but you should get organized now so that you can easily claim the tax credits associated with the act. Review the relevant portions of the Families First Act, identify who was provided benefits under the act, for how long, and the amount of their impacted pay, and work with your accountant to determine what federal employment taxes, if any, you might be permitted to retain, and if an advanced credit from the IRS is a viable option. Now, on to the question of the day. Today, I'm going to give you the skinny on overtime. Who gets it, when they get it, how it's calculated, and a little-known quicksand pit about bonuses. So first off, who gets overtime? Well, any position that's classified as non-exempt is eligible for overtime. I did a detailed review of job classifications and what qualifies as exempt versus non-exempt in an earlier episode. Be sure to listen to that when you're done with this one. When a job is eligible for overtime, it means that employee will be paid a premium amount, usually 1.5 times the regular rate, for any extra work. So how and what qualifies as extra? Well, that could be different state to state. At the federal level, overtime kicks in if you work more than 40 hours a work week. That's why it's important that you define what your work week is. For instance, if you determine your work week starts on Sunday and ends on Saturday, and then you have an employee who works 40 hours Monday through Friday, any time they work on Saturday will be more than 40 hours in that work week, so it will be considered overtime. However, if the same employee works 40 hours Monday through Friday, but the company sets the work week as starting on Tuesday and ending on Monday, then hours worked on Monday would be part of the last work week, so you could work Tuesday through Saturday and theoretically not trigger overtime. So, I bet you're saying to yourself, why wouldn't all companies set work weeks that start and end in the middle of the calendar week? Well, because in most cases, people are off on the weekends, so changing the work week wouldn't really make much difference. But how you set your work week can be an important point for some businesses, so keep it in mind. Also, I mentioned that the over 40 rule is set at the federal level. Well, as you might guess, various states have developed their own rules as well. For instance, in Colorado, employers have to pay overtime for anything over 40 hours in a week or 12 hours in a day. In California, you have to pay overtime for anything over 40 hours in a week or 8 hours in a day, or the first 8 hours of the 7th day worked. And if the employee works more than 12 hours in any day, that additional time is paid at double their regular rate. It's called golden time for a reason. Employees also get golden time for anything worked beyond 8 hours on the 7th day worked. Again, another good reason to think carefully about when your work week begins and ends. So, how is overtime calculated? Well, the easy answer is you take the employee's regular hourly rate, multiply it by 1.5, and voila, overtime rate. Or multiply it by 2 to get the golden time rate. So see, generally pretty simple, right? Well, not so fast. What if the employee does different jobs for you in the same week, both at different hourly pay rates? Well, then you would use something called a weighted average to figure out what is the base rate to use for overtime calculations. Now, different states may have different rules around using weighted averages or not, so double check with your state. Speaking of rates, the feds have a little known and little understood rule around bonuses and overtime eligible employees. If you give a non-discretionary bonus to someone who's eligible for overtime, that bonus actually changes their rate of pay, and so it also changes their overtime rate. Let's break this down a bit further. First off, what is a non-discretionary bonus? Well, if a bonus is based on a predetermined formula, like an individual or group production bonus or something based on work quality or accuracy, it's non-discretionary. It could also be something based on attendance or safety. When an employee knows about and reasonably expects the bonus, generally it's considered non-discretionary. So, back to the example. If you give a non-discretionary bonus to an overtime eligible employee, you have to factor that into their overtime calculation. It gets added to their regular rate, and that means you then have to recalculate all overtime for the period. And by the way, the period covers any amount of time the bonus covers. So if the bonus is quarterly, you have to recalculate all the overtime for that quarter. And if the bonus is annual, you have to recalculate everything for that year. Now, the good news is if the employee hasn't worked any overtime, well, then you don't have to recalculate anything. Two of the most popular questions I get are, if the overtime wasn't authorized, do I still have to pay it? Yes, you do. If your policy is that overtime has to be pre-authorized and someone works without that authorization, your recourse is to take disciplinary action. But you can't just not pay them. So go ahead, put them on warning. If it keeps happening, you may even end up letting them go, but you still have to pay the overtime. And finally, can my employee waive their right to overtime? Absolutely not. There isn't any type of side agreement you can make with your employee to allow you not to pay overtime, particularly in California. Oh, and one more thing. Make sure you pay all overtime in the pay period that it's earned. Waiting 2 or 3 pay periods to pay it out, that's a big no-no. That's it. Overtime in a nutshell. If you found this information helpful, please leave a review and tell a friend. Thanks for spending the time. Until next week, same time, same place.